evening again, everybody. My name is Lindsay Heffernan, and I'm the Deputy Director of Policy and Strategic Planning for the MBTA. I'd like to welcome you to our Forging Ahead meeting to discuss the MBTA service proposals. A couple of logistics I'd like to cover before we begin. First of all, the MBTA team has a presentation, and we'd ask you to hold your comments till the end of the presentation. Second, you can just go back a slide for a minute. Second, we'd like to remind everyone that this meeting is being audio and visually recorded and will be made publicly available. Third, we have planned this meeting to go to 8 p.m. tonight. We do appreciate the number of people who are on this call, but we do have a hard stop at 8:30. We have many translators who are going to be working hard, and we have only scheduled them to 8. So we thank them for agreeing to stay with us a little bit longer. Before we get started, I'd like to go over a few meeting controls for those who are not familiar with Zoom. If you could go forward a slide, please. We have live language interpretation for tonight's meeting, and I want to explain how to select your preferred language. First of all, if you prefer to continue on this meeting in English, I'd ask you to select the English language line. Written instructions are also up on the screen now. In your meeting and webinar controls at the bottom of the screen, please click Interpretation and then click the language that you would like to hear. Even participants meeting in English, again, we'd encourage you, or seeking English, encourage you to select English so that you can hear any comments being spoken by the foreign language interpreters. Zoom does not allow us to have an option that says Cantonese, so please, for those seeking Cantonese translation, select the German line. For those who have joined this meeting on the audio-only interpretation line, meaning you're not looking at screens right now, please hold your comments or questions until we get to that section. I'd like to ask you to either mute or to remain silent on those conference call lines so that the interpreter can both hear the presentation and share the proper information with all of you. You can go forward a slide, please. For folks who would like to view the ASL interpreters, we have 2 of them tonight. First, I would encourage you to keep your view settings in the gallery mode. That should be the default setting, and you can change this by clicking the button that says gallery mode at the top right of your screen. Gallery mode shows all the presenters together and ensures you can see the presenter as well as the speaker. When presenting slides, that view might change. Your screen will primarily display the slides with the presenters and interpreters video moving to be small at the top right corner. Off to the default setting will only show the speaker and not the ASL interpreter. To change this, you can pin the interpreter's video. To do this, click the ellipses in the top right corner of the interpreter's video and select Pin Video. You'll need to repeat this process each time we switch interpreters. The ASL interpreters expect to switch approximately every 20 minutes. And you can see their names. Tonight we have Shannon Wright and Kara Schwartz with us. Next slide, please. We also have closed captions for this meeting. By default, subtitles should be appearing at the bottom of your screen. If you do not see the captions, please press closed caption button to get them started. Next slide, please. Following the presentation, we will first answer clarifying questions. If, however, you have a technical question, you can use the chat feature at the bottom of your screen. Our technical assistant will attempt to troubleshoot any issues you may be having with the Zoom webinar platform. Next slide, please. Following this presentation, we'll be answering any clarifying questions. If you have a clarifying question about the information that's been presented, please type it into the Q&A box at any time during the presentation, and we will begin with those questions. If, however, we do want to make time for testimonials and comments, so we will not be answering every clarifying question we receive, but we will do our best to make sure we answer as many of them as we can. All comments made through any of our platforms will be part of the official public record and will be shared with the entire MBTA leadership. Next slide, please. I want to also remind everybody that there are many ways that you can communicate with us, and all of them are equally valid and appreciated. You can comment during these meetings. You can provide us questions. You can also email publicengagement@mbta.com to our MBTA community liaisons, or you can provide comment at mbta.com/forgingahead. On tonight's call, we are joined by the Secretary of Transportation, Stephanie Pollock, MBTA Deputy General Manager, Jeffrey Gonneval, as well as the Fiscal and Management Control Board Director, Crystal Cornegay. I would now like to turn things over to Secretary Pollock to help get us started.
Thank you, Lindsay, and thank you to everyone who's joined us this evening. I know there's a lot of interest, so I will try to provide a brief overview and then ask Laurel Paget-Seekins of the T to keep the presentation briefer than usual to make more time for people. But I would emphasize what Lindsay said, which is that your comments will be taken equally if you email them to us or if you go online and fill them in. So if you do not get a chance to speak tonight, please use those. We will also call first on elected officials, as Lindsay will explain after Laurel finishes the presentation. There's just a few points that I want to make before we begin the presentation. So the first is we are here to discuss service changes not because the T wants to reduce service. We have been working for years to actually increase service and to deliver hundreds of millions of dollars in improvements to the system. We are here because the pandemic has substantially changed where and how people travel, and this has resulted in a plummeting ridership and fare revenue. The T is currently providing the same amount of service that it used to provide for 1.3 million people, but carrying only 300,000 people and seeing only about 20% of the fare revenue that it used to see. I know that people will ask us to, get more money from the legislature or wait for federal support. But just like your budget at home, the T has to be able to pay its bills. The legislature, the taxpayers of Massachusetts already guaranteed the T over $1 billion of its $2 billion budget every year through their portion of the sales tax. In addition, there's another $127 million on top of the billion provided in the operating budget. The Commonwealth has upped its capital support for the T this year to $200 million, and that is over and above the money for South Coast Rail, the Green Line extension, and the purchase of the Red and Orange Line cars. The problem is not that there has been any kind of cut in state funding. It has actually gone up. The problem is that we don't have people paying fares, and we need to husband our resources now so that next year or whenever ridership begins to go back up after the pandemic and the economic situation resolve themselves, the T actually has the resources to run the greater amount of service that we all hope and believe we will need in the future. The last point that I want to make, and I know that there will be skepticism about this, but it is the truth, is that these are not permanent service cuts. There is no intention of cutting service forever and not bringing it back. Service will come back when revenue and ridership support bringing service back. So I know that people are skeptical about that, and I understand and respect that skepticism. But speaking as the Secretary of Transportation, I am telling you that when revenue and ridership, and we need both, revenue and ridership support more service, service will be added, but we will only be able to add service back in the future if we find ways to save money now. Service changes are not the first changes we are making. The T has made changes to its non-service budget to save tens of millions of dollars in order to minimize the amount of service adjustment that we need to make. So that's sort of the introduction I want to give. The presentation will talk about this a little bit more, but I just want to assure you we have not made any final decisions. We are here to listen. There will be changes made in the proposals that you hear tonight between now and when they take effect, but they will be made based on the public input, but also on the availability of resources to afford the changes that are being proposed. With that, I'm going to turn it over to Laurel.
Thank you, Secretary. So Forging Ahead is the initiative the MBTA is using to address this time and to prioritize our resources to serve our essential transit riders. As the Secretary mentioned, it's a three-pronged approach. Our first order is to reduce our internal spending in ways that don't impact service. The second is to shift some limited number of capital resources into our operating budget for a limited time to address this crisis. And the third is to reduce service, and that's what we're here to talk about tonight. But we have done the other two initiatives as well. And the final point I'll make on this slide is that as we do this, we are very much aware that we need to be thinking towards the future and to be thinking about how we make sure we keep a foundation that we can build off of, as we knew we already needed to make improvements to our network, and we understand that the needs of the region are going to continue to change as we recover. Quickly, just want to point out that the MBTA is not alone in this crisis. Transit agencies around the country are facing similar crises and are having to make similar really difficult decisions about how to proceed. The MBTA's budget is, this is just for a little bit of context, approximately $2.3 billion. That includes, our operating budget includes both the cost to operate our service in a year as well as the debt service that we pay. So this slide just shows the different categories of our budget costs. We don't completely know what's going to happen, but so we are using scenario planning to try to budget for the future and project out our potential ridership and revenue. And from that, we are figuring out how much money can come from our three buckets: the capital allocation, the internal spending controls, and our service level planning, to address the gap that we are projecting. As the Secretary mentioned, our ridership fell significantly at the start of the pandemic, but it did not fall the same amount across our modes. This chart is showing how ridership has been coming back depending on the mode. At the top of the chart, there's a yellow line for bus and a gray line for the ride, our paratransit service, and a blue line for the blue line, subway line, that shows that these modes have recovered the most. At approximately 40% of ridership. Our red, green, and orange lines are in the middle, and our ferry and commuter rail lines are at the bottom in terms of the percentage of the ridership they were carrying now compared to before the pandemic. We are also using these the scenarios that we have laid out to try to understand how ridership might return, in order to make sure that our planning is aligned with the capacity that we will need on our different modes, as we think about the fact that some bus ridership will return faster, for example, than commuter rail, likely given what we've seen so far. So this is an iterative process, meaning that we will continue to do service planning as we do normally. So we will continue to monitor our ridership and to make changes. This is something that the T does on a regular basis, and that no changes are scheduled to go into effect until next year, and we are seeking feedback on these proposals. So the framework we use to prioritize our service is a 2x2 matrix. So on one side, we have ridership. How high is the ridership now? Where do we see the ridership coming back? So high ridership and low ridership. And on the other side, we have high transit critical populations, which are serving areas with low income, people of color, 0 to low vehicle households. And we did another overlay for seniors and people with disabilities to look at who is using our services, and then less transit critical populations. And from this analysis, we categorized all of our services based on where they fell into this grid. The goal has been really to preserve the services that have the highest ridership and are serving our highest transit critical populations at our baseline minimum service standards or above that we set in what is called our service delivery policy, which was approved by our board in 2017. So just quickly, the timeline of where we are right now, we proposed some proposals to our board on November 9th. We are currently in the public engagement process. We're going back to our board. It was discussed today. This date might change, but the plan had previously been for December 7th. It might be December 14th. Stay tuned for that to get a decision. And then implementation would depend on which mode. So some commuter rail changes could start in early as January, but primarily would be in May. Ferry changes could start in March. Rapid transit changes could start in March, and most bus changes would not start until late June. And the ride impacts will likely go along with bus changes. And like I said before, we have the ability to make changes 4 times a year on bus and rapid transit and twice a year on commuter rail and ferry. So now I'll go over what our proposed service changes are. For just context, like I said, we defined a set of essential services that we're trying to protect at least our minimum service levels. And then around that, we also are preserving lower levels of service on other routes and lines. And so that is, together, those things are the essential service and the reduced levels of service is what we're calling our base service proposal. The base service proposal includes the services that are in the essential services quadrant, which is the Fairmont line on the commuter rail line, all of our rapid transit lines, 80 of our bus routes, and the ride. And then we're proposing lower levels of service on the commuter rail, the remaining bus routes, and to temporarily suspend the ferry routes. Under this proposal, most of our service is preserved, both in where people are currently using it. So 80% of our current weekday trips are riding on the services we defined as essential, and only 3% of our current weekday trips would have to divert to a different service or face a service elimination. This represents 85% of our current bus service hours, 70% of our current rapid transit service hours, 65% of our commuter rail service hours, and 0% of our ferry service. Under this proposal, some households in the MBTA service area would lose access. Previously, 82% of households were in a half mile of an MBTA service in our service area, and that would go down to 78.5%. The next slide is showing a map for this South Shore region of the proposed changes. And I'll walk through next what the changes are for these routes that are shown on the map. So first, 4 of the bus routes in the area, which are highlighted in red on this chart, would stay at or above our baseline standards. So that's the 202, the 210, the 215, and the 240. And then we are proposing that there would be 4 bus route eliminations, the 212, 221, 714, and 716, and the Hingham Hull and Hingham Direct Ferry services. We would consolidate the 214 and 216 bus routes and shorten the 230. And then there are a number of bus routes that would remain, but would have potentially lower frequencies. And on the commuter rail, our proposal is no weekend service, no service after 9 p.m., and that we would close some stations, including the Plymouth station on the Plymouth-Kingston line. So just quickly, some background on the modes. We've seen significant drop-off in ridership, especially in the peak on the commuter rail. We're at approximately 13 to 14% of pre-COVID ridership on the commuter rail. And so the proposal, as I mentioned, is to reduce the span of service for evenings and weekdays, and to decrease our our weekday trains from a total of 505 trains to 430 trains, which effectively retains 85% of our weekday service. And to close 6 out of our 141 commuter rail stations, And then we are not currently proposing the exact number of trains by line or the schedules, as we want to make sure we take into account as much ridership data as possible to understand how people are using the network before we make any final decisions on how, when and how those trains will be scheduled. Again, here are the proposed station closures. The Plymouth station is proposed to be closed due to the operational improvements that we would see on the line, knowing that we have an available parking available at Kingston Station, which has space available, and that there's low utilization of that parking lot. In terms of the ferry, right now our ridership is approximately 12% of ferry ridership pre-COVID. And right now we have pretty low ridership based on the service that we're offering, which is currently approximately 75% of our pre-COVID ferry service is being run. Our proposal is to temporarily suspend all of our ferry service. For the Charlestown ferry, this would mean use of the 93 bus route. For Hingham and Hull, it would divert ferry customers to the Greenbush commuter rail line, where there is parking available and stations are accessible. On the bus, we're seeing significantly higher ridership on our bus compared to other modes at about 41% of pre-COVID ridership. Some bus lines are bus routes are higher than others, so that's not equally distributed across all of our bus routes. So our bus service changes is to stop service after midnight and then reduce frequency on the bus routes depending on ridership, essentially. So some bus routes would see minimal to no frequency changes, and some will see larger changes. And then out of our 169 bus routes, we were proposing to consolidate 14 routes, shorten 5, and eliminate 25. This will have some impact on ride customers. About 1% of our pre-COVID ride trips would be impacted by these changes, which would switch those riders from a ADA fare to a premium fare on the ride. These changes, like all of our other changes, will continue to undergo review as part of our quarterly service planning process, and also we will be taking into account crowding and social distancing as we make changes. Just quickly on the rapid transit lines, we're about 24% of our pre-COVID ridership, with some lines, for example, the blue line, are higher than the other lines. And our proposal on the rapid transit is to stop service at midnight instead of 1 a.m. and to reduce our frequencies, again, based on ridership, and to stop the E branch at Brigham Circle. Along with this proposal, which is our base service proposal, we're also asking for feedback on how we should prioritize adding service back as resources and ridership become available. So what we've done is we've created essentially service packages, which are sort of proposals that allow us to get feedback on what are the most important priorities for bringing service back. And so we've grouped these by mode for convenience of our riders to give us feedback on them. So we have restoring ferry service, Charlestown, as well as Hingham Hull. We have, the frequency changes that we've suggested on Boston Rapid Transit and commuter rail. We have restoring evening and weekend service on commuter rail, as well as, thinking about our sort of transformation projects and how we can continue to improve service to better serve the region. So in terms of public engagement, we're asking for feedback on the framework. Does it make sense? If there's changes that we could make that would make the service that have the most impact to our customers that we should be considering, and then how we should prioritize building back as resources and ridership return. And with that, I will turn it over to Lindsay to facilitate if there are any questions.
Thank you very much. Some people have been asking in the chat. We do have 415 people on tonight's call, and so we do know there are a lot of people who want to get their thoughts in. I want to remind people, if you do want to make a comment, you're going to raise your hand, and we will be prioritizing elected officials as best as we can. If you are an elected official, I would encourage you to rename yourself by clicking on the 3 ellipses next to your name and putting your affiliation in there so that I can find you. If you wouldn't mind helping me with that, I would appreciate it. I also want to make sure that people understand that given the number of people who are here tonight, we want to do our best to hear from as many of you as possible. As I said at the start, this meeting has a hard stop. It was supposed to end at 8, a hard stop at 8:30 for our interpreters. All comments are part of the public record. Laurel, if you can go to the slide, people were asking again for where to make comments. Thank you. All comments, no matter how they are given, are part of the public record and important to us and are read. Please know that you can leave comments at mbta.com/forgingahead or use that email address that should be on your screen, publicengagement@mbta.com. Laura, I'm going to try to get through a few clarifying questions, and then we'll try to turn it over to comments. Most importantly, I think the question we're seeing consistently in the chat is, how will the MBTA assess bringing the ferry back if we don't have ferry to be tracking ridership? When you talk about ridership, that I think would answer probably 10 or 15 questions we have in the chat at this point in time.
So Laura, let me take a try at that one. So I appreciate people's concern about not bringing the ferry back in the absence of ferry data, but we have lots of other data that we can look at to determine whether demand is either rising or going to rise. We can look at travel data on nearby roads to see if that's increasing. We can look at the use of the Greenbush line to see if our former ferry customers are taking commuter rail. We can look at the economy and unemployment and employers who are restarting service. We can look at the state of the vaccine. So this is not a decision where we have to get to X number of riders and then we add service. We have modeled multiple different scenarios that combine information about the timing of a vaccine, the timing of economic recovery, and whether changes like telework and telemedicine stick, and we can look at the which of those scenarios we are actually seeing sort of come to reality. So we can say, once the FDA approves vaccines and they start being given out, we can look at the scenario that's closest to that and then see what that predicts would happen on our roads and on our transit. So I do want to reassure people that even if we do not have any ferry service, there are ways to anticipate when demand would begin to increase again and when we would need to restore service to serve that demand.
Thank you. And some people may have been on some of our other public meetings. We were on a Zoom platform before. We're now on Zoom webinar. You're asking questions about why some features are different. That is why. And I understand you can no longer change your name. So representatives, when I encourage you to do that, I apologize. That's not an option. We're seeing if we can tweak it, but we're doing the best that we can here. There was a specific question about, pardon me, if we considered paring back the ferry versus an elimination of the ferry. There's many questions in the chat about either keeping peak service or some level of service, and why, and what the potential savings is, or why that choice was made in the proposal.
So whether or not that was considered earlier, I give you my personal assurance that this issue has been raised and is under active consideration to see if there is a more de minimis peak oriented service and what that would cost and how many people we think it would carry. So yes, there are a lot of options between no ferry and using last year's schedules. They are under consideration. We appreciate any specific suggestions people have on that, because that will be considered between now and when a final decision is made.
Thank you, Secretary. A clarifying question is about the elimination of bus routes 714 and 716 and what that impact would be on the ride. Should those bus routes be eliminated and weekend commuter rail service be eliminated, would ride service in Canton and Hull be proposed to be restricted to Monday through Friday only from 5 a.m. to 9 p.m. as a result of the proposed bus cuts and or commuter rail service cuts?
Jeff, do you want to try to take this one, or should I?
I can take that, Laurel. So as of right now, We are not proposing changing the hours of the service for the ride. However, particularly with the 714, 716 changes, more than likely trips that were in the base service, or what we refer to as the ADA service, and your copay being for the ADA rate, would most likely be transitioning now to the premium rate. So you would be paying a premium fare or copay for those services.
Right, just to clarify, we are not we would keep weekend ride access for those.
That's correct. That's correct. That is correct. Thank you, Laurel.
As I go through the chat, I'm going to continue to try to answer clarifying questions, but I do want to let a couple of elected officials make their comment, and I want to begin by unmuting Representative Machino.
Oh, thank you so much. This is State Representative Joan Miskino. I represent Hingham, Hull, Cohasset, and North Scituate. And I just want to thank Secretary Pollack and Assistant General Manager Conneville for giving us this opportunity to present public comments today on what is for us a very important proposition. I will just very briefly say that the ferries, the commuter rail, the local 714 bus, and the Hingham 220 bus are lifelines for our district, for the buses along the economic corridor that is Route 3A from Hull up into Quincy Center. But the ferry and the commuter rail really are a lifeline for my district getting into Boston, which is our economic center. And that is everything from commuting to availing ourselves of all of the amenities of the cities, whether that's arts and culture, the Harbor Islands, medical appointments. And I would just urge you to listen to my local elected officials that are on the line. They speak very knowledgeably about the value of these services to our district and the investments that we have made based on them very successfully as a partner with you, and to listen to as many of the riders that are here to share how important the ferry in particular and the bus are to them. I refer you to the delegation's letter that we submitted, and I am always at your service to discuss this further and to really be a partner, both in supporting and actively looking for more service and to our economic recovery, as well as to our future economic development. Just thank you so much for letting me have this moment to speak.
Thank you very much. And I'd now like to turn it over. I understand Mr. Ramsey, you should be able to unmute, sir.
Thank you. Good evening. Can you hear me okay?
Yes, we can hear you.
Great. My thanks to all of you for coordinating the meeting, and my thanks for taking comment. I just want to speak quickly to the environmental impacts that ferry elimination service is going to have. Massachusetts has taken a very proactive approach to fight climate change. Our legislators have pending legislation to reduce gas emissions by 2030. Public transportation spending was a part of a foundational strategy to reach these goals. And eliminating the ferry service will put thousands of cars back on the road. I did some research today and found a recent state of California study that found that ferries relieve more pollution per dollar spent than any other mode of transportation. Cars are the most harmful emission of smog-producing nitrogen oxidant cancer-causing particles. And 120 grams of nitrogen oxide is produced by one car, opposed to 18 grams per ferry rider per ferry ride. So I'm going to ask you to think about that. The elimination of this service is going to put thousands of cars from the South Shore back on the road. And the impact on our environment and the congestion and the smog that's going to cause as a result of that is significant. So again, thank you for your time tonight. I'd ask you to please take that into consideration as you move forward with your decisions.
Thank you very much for your comment, and I'm now going to ask Senator Walter Timilty. You should be able to unmute.
Good evening. Thank you very much, Madam Secretary, Jeff, Lindsay, and Laurel. Appreciate this opportunity. As we're all well aware, transportation is a regional proposition, and the South Shore is no different. We are all interconnected. A couple of quick questions and a brief statement. Transportation, the MBTA, is an economic lifeline. It's a cultural lifeline. It's an educational lifeline for us all. And that's why I believe, are seeing so many people tonight on this webinar. And again, I thank you for it. A quick question. The bus routes in the district and across the region that we all serve, in many cases, will be below baseline frequency standards. Could you folks quantify what the baseline standard is and what below will look like to our riders and our constituents?
Sure. So the baseline standards are what's in our service delivery policy. And so that is based on the type of route. So a key bus route or a local bus route. And I'll flip to the slide where I have it on the slide to show. But we don't actually know the exact impacts, the percent reductions yet, because we're going to base that on like our latest ridership data when we're making the changes. And some of them might not end up below the baseline, but it's possible for it to fall below our baseline. And I'll flip to the slide that shows that.
Okay, thank you. And what options, if any, will be available to our riders who will no longer have the bus route that they rely on, the commuter rail run that they rely on to get to their jobs, for instance, on weekends? As we all know, the commuter rail is something, and the bus routes and the red line is something that people rely on as their last resort in many cases to get to their job, and their only resort. And just checking to see what options that we might be planning on for contingencies.
So, Senator, I would just note that, and again, we appreciate feedback on this, and I do want to reassure you and the other people listening, no final decision has been made. So when people are asking, would you reconsider? This is a proposal that will be taken up by the control board of the T in December. So there's going to be a lot of reconsidering. But anyway, we do look at what alternative services there are. So quite frankly, right now, unlike a year ago, we are going to continue to run all the rapid transit services on the weekends, and there are lots of parking spaces left at places like Quincy Adams and Braintree. And so people who don't want to drive all the way into Boston will have the option of using the Red Line or the other rapid transit lines, which was not necessarily an option in the past when those garages filled up, even sometimes on the weekends.
Well, Madam Secretary, thank you very much. I think we're all can agree that sometimes proposals, if they're not questioned, take on a life of their own. And in terms of parking spots, many of our constituents who utilize the MBTA, whether it be bus lines, commuter rail, or ferry service, simply do not own cars. And the T is their only lifeline, which I know you're aware of, Madam Secretary. Just moving on a moment, there'll be no commuter rail service on weekends, and it will be below baseline in many cases during the work week. Again, what options will be there for those who must have access, who have no other options?
Well, thank you very much, Senator, for your comments, and appreciate the where they are coming from and the constituents that you serve. I do have multiple other elected officials who'd like to be able to comment. I'm going to unmute Senator Susan Moran and Senator Patrick O'Connor. You'll be up right after that one. You should be able to unmute Senator Moran. Senator Moran? All right, I will come back to you. Senator Patrick O'Connor.
Good evening, everybody. Thank you for the opportunity to speak to this. Secretary Pollack, thank you for making yourself personally available. Much appreciated. These service cuts as presented, and I know that it's still just in the preliminary stages, in my opinion, would be devastating. Most notably would be the suspension of the ferry service from Hingham and Hull. I do truly appreciate the financial and ridership situation that the MBTA finds itself in, and I don't disagree at all that a level of service reduction has to happen, both due to the uncertainty of the pandemic as well as the future of commercial real estate and commercial business in general in Boston. But I do believe that to take a core public transportation option such as the ferry offline is not the right move. I know that there have been other options that have been presented to the MBTA from the service provider that would scale back ferry service that right now is not needed, but would allow the ferry to stay active and in service for use during the pandemic at a limited pace, and then what in my opinion would be a scale up to folks that would be returning to use the ferry post-pandemic. I do appreciate the conversation earlier about the encouraging news about the effective rate and availability of multiple vaccines now, and I think for the first time in a long time we're seeing light at the end of the tunnel. It's still a long tunnel to walk through, and we all have a lot of work to do together to reach it, but I do believe that when we're looking at something that would take place in March of next year, this could be something where we're in a much better position to return to a more normal workplace structure at that point in time. I know we talked about the metrics, and I know that every decision made ahead in this forging ahead strategy was based on data. So I do believe that the data component of having at least a scaled back level of service would be beneficial. And I think that, generally speaking, Madam Secretary, you have always said that transportation is not just transportation, it's also a means to unlock economic opportunity. And it has certainly been taking place down there at the Hingham Shipyard with hundreds of millions of dollars in investment, transit-oriented development, affordable housing, all of the main things that the governor wants us to check the boxes on has been done down there, as well as a $7 million investment to a brand new ferry terminal and over $2 million in MassWorks grants. So my personal opinion is scaling it back right now while ridership is down is the right approach, but eliminating the service even temporarily entirely is just going to be something that would send the wrong message to a lot of people who live here on the South Shore and who this is their preferred mode of transportation. And I know that it was before and it will be after, because there is a strong amount of community involvement and people who ride the ferry. So I appreciate all of that. Happy Thanksgiving to everybody, and thank you to everyone who's on this call from the South Shore to advocate to make sure that this service is not even temporarily limited.
Thank you very much. I'm now going to try to attempt to unmute Senator Susan Moran again.
How was that?
Perfect. We can hear you. Thank you for your patience.
Well, sorry about the technical difficulty. Secretary Pollack, thank you, and to your staff for this opportunity to be heard and for the continuing community outreach. It's crucial. You mentioned that with ridership, the service will return, but it's sort of a chicken and egg scenario because the commuter service is such an attraction to ridership. It's, if you build it, they will come kind of thing, which you've done very, very well. There just could not be a worse time to propose cuts to public transportation, which will hit hardest low-income and essential workers in our community. The T was never set up to be a moneymaker. It's a fundamental service, and the key reason most of our neighbors have intentionally chosen to make their homes in a community. Residents, employers, and members of the business community have justifiably voiced their concerns and strong opposition to the closing of the Plymouth train station, which are my constituency. While there is a temporary reduction in ridership across the board due to COVID and people being unemployed or working remotely, we must remember that it's in large part our frontline essential workers who rely on public transportation. MBTA is a public service and not meant to be economically self-sustaining. We should not be putting the burden of added commuting costs, parking, and traffic on our neighbors when they're barely getting by trying to stay healthy, keeping their children learning, and taking care of their families. We should especially not be putting the weight of the fiscal squeeze of COVID on the essential frontline worker ridership. In the Plymouth train station, we've got a 40-hour transit-oriented development with Cordage Park that's only 1/3 completed. There are 150 more apartments coming, and MEPA's approved commercial uses and 675 additional residential units. Also, this is Plymouth's only station. It'll force, if we close that station, it'll force more Plymouth residents into their cars at a time when we should be looking to the T to take advantage of lower ridership to create jobs, address maintenance and upgrade facilities and reliability. Our traffic, the gentleman earlier made the point about climate change and just going forward with the cleaner air that the lower commute has given us. And I want to sort of raise that view as well. It's been suggested that the next closest site in Kingston is within 3 miles, but when you're talking about peak traffic time, that adds a lot of time, 30 minutes or so, to folks who are juggling work and homeschooling. So I just hope that we can take this opportunity of the outreach that you, Madam Secretary, have afforded us and look at transit projects for economic recovery and not closure. Thank you very much for this opportunity.
Thank you very much. And at this point in time, I'm gonna remind everybody, I actually jumped the gun a little bit here. We are trying to hold all comments to about 90 seconds, a minute and a half. We have many members of the community here who would like to participate tonight. Representative Murator, I'm sorry if I mispronounced your name. You should be able to unmute, sir.
How's that?
We can hear you. Thank you.
Matt Muratori. Thank you so much, Lindsay and Laurel and Jeff and Madam Secretary, for taking time out. I'll be very brief. We did send a letter to you, Madam Secretary, as well as to the Fiscal Management Board, myself, Senator Moran, Representative Lenatra, and Representative Hunt. We all represent the Plymouth area. And look, we all understand. We all understand that you have to cut. We all understand that the Plymouth station is very low ridership at this point, but as Senator Moran said, it's a 40-hour project that was based on the train station being there. And we're concerned if the train station does close, where's the guarantee that it could open back up again? As you know, there's a link between the economic and the cultural relationship with the Plymouth 400 that was going to happen this year. We were going to be adding more of a schedule. And we hope to do that, again next year. So we'd ask you to please just take a look at the Plymouth station, understand if it does have to be temporary, where's the guarantee? 2 years from now, if your administration isn't there, how do we know it's going to actually open back up again? And if it has to be diminished for now, that'd be fine as well. But we really are concerned about the economic status here in Plymouth. As you know, Plymouth has grown by 1,000 people every year for the last 50 years and is still growing. And that whole area is depending on this train station. So whatever you can do, we'd very much appreciate it. And thank you so much for your time.
Thank you for your comment. Representative James Murphy.
Hi, how are you? Can you hear me okay?
We can hear you. Thank you.
So Madam Secretary, and to everybody in the call here tonight, thank you very much. The public input is vital to make sure that we make the right decisions here from a state policy standpoint. So many of us on the South Shore, I represent Weymouth and the town of Hingham. Many of us here are concerned specifically about the elimination of the ferry, the Hingham and Hull ferry into Boston. And when we look at ridership now, we all understand that ridership is artificially suppressed at this point, whether it be direction from the state to tell employers not to have employees come to work, or whether it be from the actual COVID virus itself. The numbers of ridership, obviously, we all understand are suppressed. If you look prior to this difficult situation we find ourselves in, ridership was very high for the ferry and the commuter rail. So we along the South Shore, I remember when the Greenbush didn't exist. I've been in office that long. And I'm concerned that if you were to eliminate the ferry, it'd be difficult to get it back. We look at how many years it took to get the Greenbush line back, and I know it's not apples and apples, but as legislators, we're concerned that if you do eliminate the ferry, that it's going to be very difficult to bring it back. I, along with my colleagues, have sent a letter off to you explaining our position, and I won't get into that tonight. And we also had a conversation last week with the South Shore Chamber. About 50 members of the chamber and the legislative delegation had a conversation with the general manager of the T to talk about our concerns about the ferry service. Obviously, for us, the ferry has become a very important part of our community, as has the Greenbush line. It wasn't too long ago in 2017 that we went down to the ribbon cutting of the multimodal center down there in Hingham at the shipyard. So the state has a lot of money invested, whether it be over $500 million in the Greenbush line and many millions of dollars in the ferry service. We're concerned that once it's cut, it won't come back. So we're asking the T to reconsider their decision. I know there's been no decision made, but we're asking for that option be taken off the table, that the ferry be eliminated. The millions of riders that rode into Boston, to and from Boston, represented employees traveling into Boston. They represented millions of trips into Boston for just to walk around the city and spend money in the city and come back to the South Shore. So it's an economic engine for us here on the South Shore, whether it be employers locating here because of the access to the ferry, or the millions of dollars invested in the lines along the Greenbush line and the ferry terminal line. So you can see, if you take a ride to the South Shore, the millions, if not billions of dollars spent along the ferry lines and in the train lines. So we're asking that any decision not be made as a knee-jerk reaction to a short-term problem. We do understand the position the T is in, and we understand the position we are in as a Commonwealth, but brighter days are ahead, as you heard. Once the vaccines start rolling, the members, the employees will end up back on the trains and on the ferries, and ridership will get back to where it was. We're just asking that you take the elimination of the ferry at this point off the table and work with us as legislators in the Boston Harbor Cruise Line to come up with alternatives, viable alternatives that will keep the ferries running in some capacity, so that when the riders come back, we're ready to go from day one, and we're not forced to start things over again. So I want to thank you for tonight. Input is crucial from the legislators here, along from, and also the public. And we look forward to working with you as a partner to solve any problems that we have here regarding ridership on the South Shore. So thank you very much.
Thank you for your comment. Representative Patrick Kearney.
Good evening, everyone, and thank you so much for having us on here. I just wanted to say I'm State Representative Patrick Kearney, and I have the pleasure of representing the people of Marshfield and Scituate, folks who utilize both the Greenbush line and the ferry service. I want to thank Secretary Pollock for allowing us to give public comment on this call. And I also want to say that I completely understand the circumstances that you and the MBTA are facing with reduced ridership. But I would be remiss if I was not going to express my concern about the proposed cuts, and more specifically, as some of the previous speakers had mentioned, the complete elimination of the ferry service. I am a strong believer that public transit is critical to the residents on the South Shore, and it's critical for many reasons. As many of the folks before me have touched on, it's critical for economic development, and I think critical for our economic recovery post-pandemic. And as many of the South Shore municipalities face the increasing threat of climate change, I am a strong believer that we need to do everything that we can to be encouraging folks and promoting the use of public transportation post-pandemic to reduce carbon emissions. As a BC High graduate and someone that took the train every day into school, I would also be remiss if I didn't mention the importance of public transportation to our education system. Both the ferry and the Greenbush line support both high school and college students who take public transit in every day, to whether it's BC High, UMass Boston, or folks taking the ferry into the plethora of universities that we have in the Boston area. So I want to mention the importance also of keeping folks employed during these difficult times. I know that these cuts would be detrimental to hundreds of families who have committed to a life of public service in the transit sector, and by completely eliminating the service, there might be no assurance about when these jobs could return, if they could ever return. And I know that that would be detrimental to folks that have committed their lives to public service in the transit sector. So Both the Greenbush and the ferry service are important to folks that I represent. And Secretary Pollock and your team, any consideration to keep these forms of transportation running would be greatly appreciated by me and the folks that live in the 4th Plymouth District. So thank you again for your time, and thank you for taking your time to hear our concerns. And I look forward to continuing to work with you in any capacity to make sure that these stay open to the best of our ability. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I am going to unmute Corey Evans, last name Evans.
Hi, good evening, everyone. First, as everyone said, thank you very much for taking the time to be on this call with us and to listen to us in the South Shore. We certainly understand that this is a difficult set of circumstances. We appreciate you spending this time this evening to really listen to us. My comments tonight are really going to be focused on the commuter boat. That's something that a lot of Cohasset residents rely on, especially those in North Cohasset. And just stepping away from the numbers a bit, the commuter boat is really a cherished service. I mean this really when I say I've never known any public transportation system that is spoken of as highly and as universally praised as the boat. Trains and buses, they get you where you want to go, but the boat has a connection with its riders that is just unmatched. And finally, speaking with my community, those that did take the ferry told me they would choose to drive rather than take the train. Now on the numbers side, it's very noteworthy that this cherished love service is not a drain on the MBTA budget. It is perhaps the best performing service by any metric in the MBTA system. By MBTA's own numbers, fare box recovery is nearing 70%, or historically has been that way, compared to an average of about 40% system-wide. Cost per ride is better or equivalent to the bus system. The boat also leads on on-time performance. So it's a love service, but it's also an efficient, reliable one. It also has no equivalent. There is no alternative. A bus can follow a train, but nothing can replace the connection from Hull to Boston. A 20-minute ride by boat turns into an hour-plus commute. Boats do not increase traffic, require crossings, or cause noise disturbances to neighbors. Taking all of this into account, I'm surprised that while system-wide cuts are pegged at around 30%, it is proposed that 100% of the most loved, best performing service the MBTA has, and a service which has no alternative, is cut. Cutting the boat 100% will net roughly 3% of your savings goal, while ripping away 100% of the truly wonderful service that our community relies on. And I urge you to consider that calculation when you make your final decision. Thanks again.
Thank you. Last name Kennedy, and I'd encourage people if possible to stick within the minute and a half. Last name Kennedy, you should be able to speak.
Hi, can you hear me?
Yes, we can.
Great,
Thank you.
Thank you very much. My name is Diane Kennedy. I'm chair of the Cohasset Select Board in late October, and thank you for this opportunity to speak, and Secretary Pollock for being with us tonight. In late October, the Select Board submitted for the record our comments, which have been outlined by many others tonight. We see the proposed cuts, particularly the elimination of the ferry, as decision-making that ignores the past investments the Commonwealth and our communities have made to build a first-class transit system and shape our communities around it. Again, we all understand the need to make difficult budget decisions these days, but I think the full elimination of the ferry is a mistake on many levels that have been otherwise articulated. I commute to Boston, actually Cambridge, by car. Even today, with a significant decrease in those working in city offices, commutes from the South Shore are a minimum of 1 to 1.5 hours. It took me 1 hour and 10 minutes to get home tonight. Absent the ferry, which pre-COVID had approximately 6,000 riders a day, the entire metropolitan Boston area will be further choked by thousands of additional cars, even if half of those cars that from just the ferry alone decided to drive into Boston. It's going to choke Quincy Shore Drive, the Neponset Bridge, the Expressway, Route 128, and have a ripple effect throughout metropolitan Boston. It's impossible to comprehend the kind of human and emotional toll that sitting in a car for 4.5 hours a day will have on people that commute into Boston, that have to get home to soccer games and pick up their kids. On behalf of myself and residents of Cohasset, I ask you to reconsider the proposed cuts, and in particular, the full elimination of the Hingham-Hull ferry service. Thank you so much for your this opportunity to speak.
Thank you. And now last name Flaherty.
Hello, thank you. Patrick Flaherty here from the Plymouth Select Board, and I'll be brief as stated by Senator Moran and Representative Muratori that the closure of Plymouth Station permanently, which we know is not on the table, but that's the real concern. Understand, just like many others stated, that there's some hard decisions to be made, but Plymouth Station, it is a component of the 40R project there and economic development in this area. And there's really universal acceptance that there's hundreds of housing units coming online already and in the future that are planned at the location where this station is a critical component to making that work for the economic development and just the access to live here and also work in Boston and other places. So just ask that if you can please consider how to ensure early close, but the reopening of the station in the future can be absolutely guaranteed at some point, and that would be a very, very warm welcome, even though it is a tough understanding it might have to be shut down temporarily. Thank you very much for your time and allowing this comment.
Thank you very much. And I do want to just say, I believe we've moved through most of the elected officials. I'll begin calling on those who have raised their hand. You can see in front of you the button that you would click on to raise your hand should be at the bottom center of your screen. If you are on a mobile device, you're going to tap the raise hand button in the bottom center of your screen. If you have called into this call using your phone, you're going to dial *9. Once you raise your hand, you'll be added to the queue with others, and I will do my best to call on folks on a first come, first served basis. However, I do also have I'll take some pauses in order to take any questions that might be in the interpretation rooms. So bear with me as we do that. When it's your turn to speak, I'll say your last name or the last 4 digits of your phone number, and we'll let you know that I am unmuting you. If you are on a computer or mobile device, a box will pop up in the center of your screen. You'll need to confirm that you'll want to be unmuted before you begin speaking. And if you're on a phone, an automated recording will let you know that you are unmuted. You may speak as soon as the recording finishes. If you are unmuted, everyone in the meeting can hear you. Before you make your comment, do please slowly state your name and any organizational affiliation. Please remember to speak slowly as we have many interpreters working with us this evening. Please remember to limit all comments to no more than 90 seconds so that we can get through all of those who have their raised hands. And we ask that we only make one comment so that everybody has the chance to speak. Please remember that you can post your comments as well, both on the website and in email format. We'll put those back out in the chat so everyone knows how they can participate. It sounds like, of course, I actually missed a couple of elected officials. Bear with me. I understand Stephen Lynch, you should be able to speak. Congressman Lynch, pardon me.
Yeah, no problem. Good to be with you. This is probably the 4th or 5th one of these I've done because we're doing them all around the district, and I really do appreciate, Madam Secretary, that you're doing that. In the interest of time, I just want to say that, you know, we did the CARES Act, and I think there was $827 million on that. We've done the HEROES Act, sent that over to the Senate, which is about 1.5 trillion in that. We recognize the need, very, very friendly to commuter rail, very friendly to ferries. They actually incorporated my zero emission buses for every city act. So about $1.2 billion in that. So there's every indication that we will have resources that would make a lot of these cuts unnecessary in the first place. The second is on timing, especially with respect to the ferry, which is near and dear to my heart and serves a big part of my district. You know, we are maintaining ferry service for December, January, February, and then we're stopping ferry service in, you know, May, June, July. So, you know, the ridership drops, as you might expect, December, January, and February, yet we're maintaining service for that period, and then we're cutting it later on. So there may be a mismatch in terms of our plan and how that all works out. So I'm not advocating that we maintain every bit of full spectrum transportation that we have going on right now, but I think there's a wiser way to do this, and that, you know, we can shave a little bit here or there, but I would really ask, you know, and I also recognize that, you know, General Manager Poftak has been very, very good on this. And I know we've tried to identify transportation sensitive areas where people might be more greatly disadvantaged because of these cuts, and we're trying to address that. But you know, when you talk about Hull and Abington and all the area of the South Shore that utilizes that ferry, that's very, very important, and utilizes the commuter rail. And those are, you know, those are working class communities that I think deserve to be recognized as a transit sensitive area that could benefit from a little bit of, you know, just maintaining some service to those areas in a more energetic and robust way, let's say. So happy to work with you. You know, I'm on the Transportation Committee, so this is right in my wheelhouse. I know, Madam Secretary, you came down, as the governor did, to try to work through what Massachusetts' priorities will be in the transportation bill. I'm just asking that you work with us and, you know, try to recognize a little bit more deeply the timing here. I think that the resources will be there when necessary, and you know, just as they were under the CARES Act. And I know you're being very wise about, you know, using that money, but I would just ask for a little bit of patience. I want to thank all my colleagues from state government and town government who have been on. I just heard Diane Kennedy on there as well. We need to work as a team on this, and I'd really rather have a two-way conversation about how we can do this, rather than just, you know, you come up with your plan and then we respond to it. You know, that's we might have been able to avoid some of this, you know, some of the conflict that I see going on right now. So look, I know these are tough times, and I'm not trying to say don't change anything and leave it the way it is and fund 100% of what you're doing. You can't do that. I know what your revenue is, but I think there's a better way to handle this in a fashion that is more respectful of the community's needs, each community's needs, because we do have a diversity of need out there. I even saw that in the CARES Act where we put the money out there, but town to town, they used that money on different priorities because of the unique needs of that individual city or town. You know, Brockton looked at it much differently than you know, Cohasset or Hingham or Hull. So I just think that's a better format to use in order to really address the unique needs of each of these communities, given the pressure that we're all under because of the pandemic. So I spoke longer than I intended to, but that always happens. I appreciate you. I really do, Madam Secretary. You're terrific. I just think we might be able to do a little better job on this if we had a more ongoing dialogue rather than what seems like an edict. Even though you're going around asking everybody their opinion, it's everybody's opinion about your plan, not everybody's opinion about how their community might be best served. That's what I got. Okay, thank you. I yield back.
Thank you, Congressman, and we appreciate you as well, and all your great work on the Transportation and Infrastructure Committee and the CARES Act, without which the T wouldn't be running any service right now, practically. And we will work with you, and we do respect the needs of the different communities, and that's exactly what this conversation is about. There's still time to hear people out and make changes, and we will work with the delegation as we always have, and hope that you can produce the kind of additional federal support that would make a huge difference, not just to the T, but to the Commonwealth and to cities and towns. So thank you, as always, for the role you play.
Thank you. And I'm going to unmute, I believe I have Senator John Keenan under Pesolano. You should be able to unmute.
Thank you. Good evening, and thanks for the opportunity. Hi, Lindsay. How are you?
Hello.
Madam Secretary, Jeff, Lowell. It's great to see you all. Just very briefly, so I want to make a couple of points if I can, and I appreciate all that you're doing to address the budget deficit, and I know it's not an easy task, and I appreciate that you are relying on data as you make your decisions. I have a couple of requests. One would be that as you look at the data, that you look a little bit beyond it. For instance, the 214, 216 bus routes in Quincy, which I frequently was riding prior to the pandemic, there is a time on the 214 where it kind of detours off to McGrath Highway as it makes its way to Quincy Center. And with less frequency and moving that and combining the 214 and 216, that may be eliminated. And it doesn't look on paper or even on a map like it's a big deal, because to go from the Stop and Shop stop on McGrath Highway over to the Coddington Street stop is maybe only about 50 to 75 yards. Not a big change for people. However, that bus services senior facilities down in Germantown, in particular, O'Brien Towers, and many of the residents there use the bus to go to Stop and Shop. And so while it may only be 75, 50-yard difference, that is a big difference for a senior going to Stop and Shop and then returning with groceries. And so I ask that as you look at the data, that you look beyond it as well to kind of realize that there are those individual impacts to people. And then secondly, the paradigm that's used here, and it makes sense, is that you look at utilization and then you factor or function service off of that utilization. I'd ask that you at some point kind of change the paradigm as well, that rather than just do it based on utilization, that you also look at it as an opportunity to drive future utilization, to change commuting patterns. For instance, there's been a lot of discussion tonight about the ferry, and I've been a big supporter of ferries. The Hingham Ferry is critical to the South Shore, and I support the efforts of my colleagues and the residents of the communities that are impacted to keep that ferry service going. It might be time, as we go through this pandemic, to use it as an opportunity to drive expanded ferry service, to look at additional ferry stops, for instance, a ferry stop at Squantum Point in Quincy. While we have this opportunity, while we're not bound by the schedules that have bound us in the past, that we have some flexibility as we ramp back up, that we look at incorporating that to drive people off the roads to, as Mr. Ramsey had said, I think he was one of the first speakers, to a less environmentally impactful mode of transportation. So I just, those 2 points, please look beyond the data to the individuals behind the data. And then as we move forward, to do a bit of a paradigm shift from utilization driving frequency to using this as an opportunity to drive people towards our preferred modes of transportation. So I thank you. I thank all my colleagues and all the folks who have joined on this call. I want to thank Congressman Lynch for the great work that he's doing in Washington. And one final point that he makes, which I think is very important, it appears, and we are hopeful, that help is on the way. And that as that help becomes available, again, that we use it to model a transportation system that we'd like to see in the next 5, 10, 15, and 20 years. And then I'm sorry, but final point, we have so many good employees doing such great work. Anything that we can do to keep them working and ready to respond when utilization increases again, I think that's critical as well. Thank you, and have a great night, and a happy Thanksgiving to all.
Thank you very much. And last name, Constable. You should be able to unmute. Thank you, we can hear you.
Thank you. This is Jen Constable, Chairwoman of the Hull Board of Selectmen. Good evening, Madam Secretary. Thank you for the opportunity to address you this evening. So while the town certainly recognizes the financial challenges that are confronting the T right now, the T is forging ahead proposal, specifically, again, the elimination of all ferry service as well as the 714 bus route that services the town of Hull, will have an immediate, substantial, and a disparate impact on the residents and businesses, not only in Hull, but really on much of the South Shore subregion. I'd argue that these cuts are also inequitable. They propose full elimination of all public transportation from a single community. Community where our furthest border may be a half a mile from a commuter rail station, but it removes ferry service and bus service. The T-zone data reinforces this inequity. The T has been reporting that between 65 and 85% of its modes of transportation will be maintained, but 0% of ferry service. Another demonstration of the underestimation of the value and the reliance upon ferry service to the region. The Hingham Hull Run has experienced a 23% rate of return ridership, not 12% as is repeatedly reported in these presentations. And that 23% return ridership is similar and even greater in some instances to that of return ridership on the green, orange, and red lines where service is being maintained. Another data point that's concerning is that 33% of ferry riders are a 0 to 1 car household. There's a huge difference between 0 and 1. That data assumes and doesn't look at how many of those households are actually a 0 car household. A number of ferry commuters, and I can attest to this on a year-round basis, utilize their bike to commute to the ferry in order to get to work in Boston. So they simply can't afford the loss of a ferry and the bus route. Eliminating ferry service is also in direct contrast to the MBTA's long-range transportation goals and objectives. Ferry service and our waterways really are due to be looked at as an extension of the Commonwealth's roadways and the overall public transportation system. They in fact represent safe, resilient, efficient, sustainable modes of transportation, and they truly promote economic vitality and transportation equity. Of particular note, on either end of that Hingham Hull Run are very fragile seasonal economies. The ferry reports about 2 million riders annually that serve as consumer base for those businesses, both in Hull and at the Hingham shipyard. Those businesses are already reporting upwards of 80% reduction in revenue over the past year. If ferry service is eliminated, they do not expect to survive another season. And this results in a devastating domino effect of revenue loss for communities, to which right now we have no solution. So the T savings would in effect be a municipality's revenue loss. You've heard from others this evening that eliminating ferry service undermines the millions in local and state investment already made that's supporting mixed-use development, affordable housing, and again, our local economies. And I will wrap up, but I have to and cannot emphasize enough that elimination of the 714 bus route will have a demonstrable negative effect on our most transit critical populations in Hull. Riders of the 714 bus not only use it for commuting to their jobs, but access to amenities and healthcare, local healthcare. So again, we understand fully as a municipality the impact of revenue loss over the past year, but we implore the MBTA to not fully eliminate service, but to look at alternatives to reduce service along the ferry lines as well as the 714 bus route. Thank you.
Thank you. And last name, Power.
Good evening. My name is Mary Power, and I'm the chair of the Hingham Board of Selectmen. Thank you for the opportunity to speak with you this evening. For many years, Hingham and our neighboring towns have been focusing on economic development and community building. Available and reliable public transportation is critical to our success. Nearly 2 decades ago, the decommissioned Hingham shipyard was identified as a site for transit-oriented mixed-use development. Since that time, over $500 million has been invested to create hundreds of units of housing, much of it affordable, nearly 300,000 square feet of retail and office space and public spaces. Developers have told us that the key anchor to the project and to their investment decision was the ferry. Many residents of the shipyard do not own vehicles. The loss of ferry service will reduce interest in nearby housing options and will have a significant adverse impact on businesses who have built their operating model around proximity to a routine commuter service with multiple lines a day. Representative Murphy has already spoken to both the ferry and the Greenbush train, facilitating support of the greater Boston economy by South Shore residents, both during the week and on weekends. I would note that under the proposed plan, there is no weekend public transportation in and out of Boston from Hingham, Hull, and Cohasset. Previous speakers have highlighted that over $500 million has been invested in restoring the Greenbush line and in establishing the Hingham Ferry Terminal, which was designated a national intermodal connector. To us, we think it demonstrates clear recognition of the importance of these transit services. So in summary, the economic impact of taking transit out of transit-oriented development would be significant to our community, to our businesses, and our residents. And we do note that these reductions are slated to take effect as ridership recovery is likely to accelerate with the rollout of a vaccine. We thank you for your time and consideration, and we would ask that you please reconsider the elimination of the ferry service and to avoid drastic service level reductions to the Greenbush line. Thank you for listening.
Thank you very much. And I'd like to next recognize Jim Evers, who I believe is from 589 local. You should be able to speak.
Hi, Lindsay. Thank you.
We can hear you.
Thank you. Good evening. Thank you for the opportunity to speak. Madam Secretary, Jeff, the rest of the committee that's on here. My name's Jim Evers. I'm the President Business Agent of the local 589 Boston Commons Union. And I just want to go on the record that all service and routes are essential to many riders and communities throughout Boston and the South Shore. I also wanted to just touch on this promise that these cuts are only temporary. But I mean, I've seen this playbook many times in the past, and temporary closures are usually not temporary. So I just want to touch that and put it on the record. But also our frontline workers, they don't deserve the cuts and the stress added to them while, you know, they've been coming to work during this whole pandemic and putting themselves at risk and moving the riders throughout the Commonwealth. So please consider the employees as well during these cuts. And, you know, I'm just here to say now more than ever, riders and essential workers need reliable and safe transportation. Our elderly, disabled, in the communities of color deserve a system that isn't over a safe capacity and affords them the dignity and respect they deserve in our transit system. And I just want to say public transit is a public good, and we're here for the communities and the riders, whatever they need moving forward. And I appreciate any considerations to limit the amount of service cuts that you guys were looking for at the control board. Thank you, and I appreciate the time.
Thank you very much. Last name Purcell. You should be allowed to unmute now.
Thank you. Thank you to the board and to all my colleagues who spoke before me. My name is Donna Purcell. I'm a member of the House Select Board. And I just wanted to reiterate what others have said, that the public transportation in our community of Hull, the ferry, the 714 bus, and the Greenbush line are essential to all the residents, businesses, and the local economies in Hull, as well as our neighboring communities. Acknowledging the complexity of the fiscal situation, one thing is clear and should not be overlooked, that the severity of Hull's local commercial economy and that of all of its residents rests on the decision put forth by the MBTA. We employ the MBTA and the Fiscal Management Control Board to make the responsible and equitable decision to maintain all public transportation for Hull and the South Shore throughout the pandemic and especially the post-recovery. You know, this affects our businesses, our economy. People who moved to Hull have moved out of the city and into Hull during the pandemic, and taking away this vital transportation back to their jobs is only going to rise the unemployment levels higher. So please take our voices in consideration, and I appreciate it. Thank you.
Thank you. And I'm going to unmute last name Taylor.
Hi, can you hear
me? We can hear you. Yep. Thank you.
My name's Mike Taylor. I live in Hingham, and I've taken the boat for many years as a primary form of transportation into Boston. I just want to say, to start off, Madam Secretary and the team, you guys have done tremendous work and presenting the figures at the beginning of the call. And I just want to say thank you very much for the opportunity to speak on this issue. I can only speak from personal experience with the ferry related to people traveling into Boston from Hingham. My fear is that because of the proposed reduction in the ferry route, that people will start to drive en masse. So those 6,000 trips a day that are on the ferry will now become cars on the expressway as people head into Boston. I think that's the biggest, that's going to have a tremendous environmental impact, both in quality of life and obviously air quality has been captured by previous speakers. The other point I'd like to make relative to the ferry is the folks that take the ferry don't want to drive. None of us want to drive into Boston. I don't want to pay $43 a day to park my car in Boston and all the wear and tear that it takes to get back and forth and the stress. I'd much rather pay some amount less than that I pay now to take the ferry. So if there can be a compromise worked through here where there's a service reduction down to maybe 3 or 4 trips a day back and forth from what the service level is, and we can maintain the ferry, I think that'd be a great resolution for the people of Hingham. And again, I appreciate your time this evening. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. And I'm going to unmute last name Frazier.
I got it. Clark Frazier, resident of Hingham. I have a couple of quick issues. First is the bonds. I noticed there's like 523 million. I would ask that the legislature consider lifting those off the back of the MBTA. That would pay for the service. Second is capacity. Because the Old Colony line is single track, there is not enough capacity there to accommodate service. If there's no ferry service, eventually the combination of the expressway and the railroad will block up. Right now, you cannot make off-peak inbound trips to Boston because of the single track. And also the extra traffic will have major impacts in Savin Hill. Also in Hingham and Hull, we have poorly connected and independent services that don't coordinate with each other. If I take a train in the morning and want to come back late and have to take a bus, I can't get back to the train parking lot. I also don't take the bus usually because I can't rely on connections from the Red Line. If the bus runs every hour and I miss it, then I'm stuck in Quincy for an hour. Also, if I drive the Red Line, the parking is a disaster. You're using pay by phone. You should be using MassDOT's Easy Pass or pay by plate so that you just park and then you get billed rather than doing what we're doing now. So there are many things the MBTA could be doing to improve its service. Now, the last thing is, I think the timing is way off. They're going to need weekend and night service as soon as next fall when concerts and sporting events and everything starts, and changing service every 3 or 6 months is just not adequate. You need to be able to change it more frequently. Thank you.
Thank you. I'm going to unmute last name Washburn. Apologies, folks. Zoom seems to be going a little slowly. Washburn, I'm going to come back to you next. Give me a moment. Last name Noonan.
Hi.
Can you hear me? We
Yes,
can
I
hear
can
you.
hear you.
That Noonan,
Can you hear
thank
me?
you. Yes.
Hi, this is Laura Howes Noonan. I'm an employee of Boston Harbor Cruises. So the MBTA says it will revisit bringing back the ferry twice a year after eliminating it. However, they're extremely vague about this plan. This is because the ferry is run by a third party, Boston Harbor Cruises, and the MBTA would have to dissolve their assets of the docks, their vessels, and a highly trained, experienced crew to run these vessels. Once these assets are given up, there is no easy way to really bring these services back. When asked specifically about this at the November 9th board meeting, there was no answer given to the public. Not only do myself and immediate family that lives in Hingham and Hull also rely on the ferry for commuting, but the existence of the ferry itself is what keeps my family employed. My husband is an engineer for the BHG ferries, employed for 14 years. I've worked in the Boston division for 7 years. We bought a home to plant our family South Shore. I know exactly what the end of the ferry means to us personally. The existence of the Hingham and Hull Ferry keeps over 200 of my coworkers employed year-round with benefits. And taking away the ferry now in a pandemic will add us to the abysmal unemployment line. Many of our captains have worked on the ferries for several decades. Once they are let go, it will be impossible to easily get highly skilled workers with enough sea time to run the ferries. The ferries need to continue so we do not work. We know the vaccine is coming. We know in a year or two it will bounce back what it was. Me or myself from the shore know exactly how crowded the Greenbush line, Hingham Ferry, and the Red are during rush hour times pre-COVID. They consistently run out of parking, and even the ferry itself would often fill up to capacity. Once commuters start to go back into the city, there has to be enough public transit. Taking away irreplaceable services is a horrible idea long-term. It will over-traffic our already over-trafficked highways and increase carbon emissions in an area of the Gulf of Maine, which has been scientifically published to be one of the fastest warming areas in the globe. In addition, when the board was asked if there would be enough parking available for the Greenbush line once numbers return to normal, they did not provide an answer. The only compromise for the Hingham Hull Ferry is to temporarily reduce trip numbers until numbers return to pre-COVID. It is the most logical and sustainable solution. In addition, the city of Boston, all of these legislators speaking today and elsewhere oppose these service cuts as well. Listen to what the people are saying to you.
Thank you. I'm going to unmute last name Washburn, and I'm going to implore the group to please keep your comments to the time limit so we can get to everybody who would like to speak. Thank you.
This is Tanya Washburn. My question was answered.
Your question was answered. Okay, thank you. Appreciate that. And I'm going to unmute Brian Howard, I understand from the town of Randolph.
Good evening. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you.
Excellent. My name is Brian Howard. I am the town manager in the town of Randolph, and I will try to stick to the 1:30. I certainly appreciate the difficulty of the decisions the MBTA has to make. We're dealing with some similar issues of budget cuts and striking balances due to COVID and the impacts on our budget locally. I urge that the MBTA continue to critically look at transportation through the equity lens, not just because of Title VI, but because it's, quite frankly, the right thing to do. We're in the situation that we're in because of the COVID pandemic, and it showed you that as you're trying to save your essential services, Randolph and towns like Randolph are made up of people that are essential workers. When COVID hit, it hit communities of color hard, and Randolph was one of those communities. And that is strongly because so many of our residents do not have the luxury to be able to work at home, as they are essential workers in retail, essential workers in transportation, and essential workers in the medical field. For a lot of Randolph residents, no bus simply means it's not a question of two cars or in some cases, a bus. They are unable to get to work, and they are unable to assist others based on the lines of work that I spoke about earlier. The commuter rail, I ask that you take a hard look at that. If there's a way to do a Monday, on the weekends, a morning run and an evening run versus complete elimination. Finally, the ride. We try and offer some services locally to our seniors and our disabled. However, we're not able to do it all, and the ride is critical to our community. It's the lifeline, so many for food and medical. Anything you can do to make sure that continues would be tremendously appreciated. I thank you for your time.
Thank you very much for your comments. And last name Clapper.
Thank you. This is Kylie Clapper. I'm from Hull, Massachusetts. Thank you, Madam Secretary, and Jeff and Lindsay and Stephanie and Laurel. I've been to a few of the other meetings, and I appreciate all the time everyone is putting into this and hearing us. And to echo, Joan Moschino and Stephen O'Connor and the others that have spoke earlier, I just ask that that MBTA consider taking elimination off the table as we continue this discussion, right? I hear that this is an iterative process. I know that we are listening, that there's a lot of listening to us, and I really hope that you are hearing us in the sense of how devastating cutting off the ferry service to Hingham and Hull will be. I've been volunteering a small bit of time with the Save the Ferry, and I've been posting the testimonials of my neighbors in Hull, and not only eliminating the ferry, but also eliminating the 714 bus. I mean, that is completely cutting off any type of public transportation service to the peninsula of Hull. And it's devastating not only for me and my access to, and as it's been commented on before, the great love of the boat. Yeah, I love my commute. Not a lot of people can say that. And I've been, fortunate in that way. And it's something that I rely on. And other people, especially if you eliminate the 714, will have absolutely no service. These are people who don't have cars, who rely on the public transportation service. So, and I know as in closing, there's been a lot of talk too about, this is the time to invest in our resources, in our community and transit, and also be mindful of the environment. So thank you for the time. I just ask that you consider taking elimination of the ferry off the table as we continue these discussions. I'm fine with the reduction in service until we can scale back up. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Next, I'm going to unmute last name Fisher, but before I do, after this comment, I'm going to turn to the interpreters in the interpretation rooms and ask them if they have questions. So if anybody in the interpretation room has a question, please let your interpreter know. Last name Fisher, I'm going to unmute you. There we go. We hear you.
Yes, thank you, Madam Secretary, Jeff, Lindsay, and others. Joe Fisher, Hingham Selectman. I'm going to cover two topics that have not been covered yet: public health and affordable housing. In these days of the pandemic, we've all learned that the risk of COVID-19 transmission is lower when groups of individuals are outdoors instead of in confined spaces. That's the reason that the CDC and the Mass Department of Public Health have encouraged restaurants to prioritize outdoor seating. That's the reason why town meetings have been held outside in recent months. Hingham just had our special town meeting this weekend. Yet the MBTA is now proposing to eliminate the only mode of public transportation that allows for outdoor seating and abundant fresh air for its riders, the ferry service. Greenbush is simply not a substitute for the ferry as a matter of public health. We encourage the MBTA to add public health as a metric when it evaluates its proposals. And with respect to affordable housing, the proposed termination of ferry service will hurt the affordable housing infrastructure that Hingham has been supporting over the past decades. Our recent affordable housing projects include a 281-unit rental community located directly at the Hingham shipyard. We also have a 220-unit rental community located across the street, across 3A from the shipyard. Both of these projects were approved by the Department of Housing and Community Development under Chapter 40B. These housing developments are for residents who may not have ready access to automobiles and cannot readily get to the Greenbush train. Our promise to low and middle income families who move to Hingham for these projects, as well as our other affordable projects, is that the families would have direct access to public transportation, specifically the ferry. That's why they moved to the shipyard area. And now the proposal is to eliminate the ferry. Greenbush, the train, is not a reasonable substitute in these circumstances. Thank you.
Thank you very much. At this point, I want to take a pause and see if we have any questions in our interpretation rooms. My interpreters, pop into the English room for me and let me know if you have any questions.
This is the Cantonese interpreter, and I don't have any questions.
No questions and no questions. Okay, thank you. Thank you, gentlemen, both very much. And now I will unmute last name Henderson, please.
Hi, can you hear me?
Yes.
Hi, thank you for letting me speak. I wanted to say, as Senator Moran said earlier, that the T was never meant to be a moneymaker. It is a necessity, a necessary mode of transportation. Sometimes the MBTA needs to consider biting the bullet and accepting financial loss, especially now during the pandemic. Cutting service during a pandemic is unconscionable. To put people's lives at risk, forcing them onto packed buses and trains. My wife and I have already experienced this greatly increasing in the last month or so, as we rely on the 220 and the 222 bus in Weymouth that brings us into the city to work. We've experienced packed buses almost every day at various times of the day. You said you haven't made final decisions and that you're here to listen. So listen to this huge concern. Listen to the community that is not in favor of service cuts. The state is forcing people to go to work in a pandemic. Daycares are forced to open to ensure people's kids are being cared for by teachers while parents can go to work. You can't force people to go into work and at the same time cut their way of getting there. The burden cannot fall on the working people in these communities. And as I said, speaking personally, the 222 and 220 buses are a necessity for people all over Weymouth and Hingham getting into work, and there have been very full buses lately at any time during the day. It has felt very uncomfortable and dangerous even during the spread of COVID. Please, please take this into consideration. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And I am now gonna unmute last name Hull.
Hi, thanks for the opportunity to talk. I wanted to bring kind of a personal relation to how this happened to us. We lived in Boston until February. And last year we took the commuter rail out on the spokes to find out where we'd like to live and move outside of Boston. We chose Plymouth. We live about 30 feet from Plymouth Station. The train left about 15 minutes ago. And the reason we chose Plymouth is because we could still get back into Boston. We don't have a car, but we live at the apartments in the newly developed Plymouth Station complex that is a really nice area. We can walk to downtown Plymouth, but then we can still get back into Boston. My husband's cardiologist is in Boston. Our doctors are in Boston, and so on and so forth. And so the elimination of the Plymouth station would be devastating for us. We don't have a car. We walk, we could get maybe 2-3 miles, that's it, or else we go to Boston. We based our life on the MBTA. We love the commuter rail. The people are fabulous. It employs great people. It's a reason for people to come to Massachusetts. It's a way to get around. To not have a station in Plymouth, outside of Boston, when you go outside of Massachusetts, Plymouth is a very well recognized place of tourism, and it should be represented by a train station that people can come to Boston, they can take the train to Plymouth, and they can come to view the Plymouth and all the things that Plymouth has to offer. So I don't think that elimination of the Plymouth station is viable and for the state of Massachusetts or for supporting of the community. Thank you.
Thank you very much for your comment. And next I'm going to go to the last name Boylan.
Thank you, Madam Moderator. I wonder if it might be possible to yield my time to Jason McCain if he is on the call.
Jason McCain?
Yeah, McCann, Jason McCann.
McCann, Jason McCann. Sure.
Thank you.
You're welcome. Mr. McCann, I believe you are unmuted.
Oh, hello. Oh, thanks, George. That's really nice. My name's Jason McCann. I'm one of the organizers of the Grassroots Save the Ferry group. I wanted to talk just to share, we've been collecting a lot of different stories and testimonials of all the different types of riders that rely on the Hull Hingham Ferry, including lots of nurses, frontline workers who've been taking it throughout the pandemic, seniors who take the ferry in regularly to go to medical appointments, lots of people that we've been hearing from. And one of the things we're doing now is to help you all out is really try and get as much information as we can about when people are planning to go back and what boats they're planning to use for when commuters go back in the new year. But I would say to please be patient with us when it comes to that effort, because trying to do that by December 7th is a huge task, and there's still so much uncertainty around when people are going back, but we're really doing our best to bring you those stories and bring you that information so that you can make a decision that doesn't result in the suspension of the service. And one of the things I've been hearing from a lot of people is that when they do go back, a lot of people aren't going to want to get on the commuter rail. Like they feel the ferry is a much more safer service. You can be outside, it's more COVID safe. So I just want to say on behalf of the Save the Ferry group of fellow Hull Hingham dedicated ferry riders, please reconsider your decision or your proposal to suspend the service. Thanks for your time.
Thank you. And to Jason and all the others and those on the call who maybe aren't raising their hand, I do want to, can you go forward to the website one more time? Just want to remind people that you can get comments for those people that you're organizing, Jason, or others, and can share them at mbta.com/forging ahead. And next, I'm going to unmute last name Patterson.
Hi, Jean Patterson from Cohasset. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can.
Great, thank you. Wanted to comment as a rider since 1998 on the ferry into Boston, and also as a professional and, you know, the context of what professional companies are going to be doing. So first of all, I did want to talk about the short term. So I'm glad people brought up the safety of the ferry and being outside. I think that's something to consider, that in the short term that should continue. Understanding that, you know, some of the rides need to be cut or service levels should be cut in this time. But I think eliminating the ferry completely is a mistake, because it's not giving that safe option right now. And then I do believe from a corporate standpoint, you know, at first everyone closed down on March 13th. They thought, you know, we'd go back in September. Then it became January 1. I don't foresee, you know, going back in the winter, but I do see probably by April 1, more and more people will return to work. And so to cut the ferry at that point does not make as much sense. I think the other thing is the reliability of the ferry. The ferry is so much more reliable than the train. You know, over the 20 years, you can just count on the ferry running, whether it's a storm, you know, in bad weather. It's always on time. Those 3 horns beep and that ferry takes off. And that's really important for us that are commuting to work and trying to get there on time and on time for meetings. The other thing about the ferry is that although the train does this as well, it allows you to work while you're commuting versus being in your car and dealing with conference calls and meetings, because as we have moved to a more remote society, the workday is expanding, and work calls can start early and go late, and people are trying to be efficient during the commuting time. So to take a train or ferry, I think is really important because you can get work done and not be distracted while driving. I think the other thing is the economic issue. So again, I've been listening tonight and hearing what a lot of people said, and I think it would just really decimate the Hingham shipyard, both the businesses and the restaurants that have invested there and the shops that invested there, plus everyone that has either bought property there or rented property there. I also think that the real estate market has boomed on the South Shore since March. Everyone is moving down here. Housing prices have skyrocketed, but that's bringing revenue to the towns of the South Shore. And if we take away the commuting options from the South Shore to Boston, it's going to decimate the real estate market and then reduce tax revenue to the towns. So again, I think that's another economic consideration. Someone also mentioned, you know, the social aspect. I think the ferry has that social connectivity, which we've been talking about. There's going to be a lot of, you know, mental health issues after this COVID surpasses, and you know, I think one is the camaraderie that the Hingham Ferry brings. It will be important to rebuild connections. It also, again, I think if the option of the commuter rail or driving, I do think people would opt to drive, but then that driving and that hour-and-a-half commute causes more stress, and that, again, it's not needed. So I think you're going to actually have a mental health impact on people, as crazy as that might sound, by eliminating the ferries. So, I think those are a few of the comments that I wanted to make. Again, I think the reliability is important that the ferry brings, and to eliminate it completely would be a mistake.
Thank you. I do want to remind folks as best you can to keep your comments to the time allotted so we can get through everybody who would like to speak, who has their hand raised, and I'll unmute last name Sylvia. Or Sylvia.
Hello, can you hear me?
Yes.
Yes, thank you. Thanks for the time today, Secretary and MBTA. My name is Mike Sylvia. I'm a Cohasset resident. I'm a faithful rider of the Hingham and Hull Ferry. Having lived and worked near Boston for the last 20 years, I'm no stranger to the MBTA, living in South Boston, Charlestown, and Cohasset. I've taken a lot of buses and red lines and orange lines and ferries in my lifetime. It's how I get to work. It's how I've been getting to work for over 20 years now. And it's certainly no accident I ended up in the South Shore for its connection to the ferry. I won't bore anyone with ridership data. I think we've talked a lot about that. But we talked about estimating some non-ridership data. So one thing that sticks to my mind is the timing of the elimination of the ferry. It seems to be in line with when a lot of companies plan to be back, and people plan to be back in Boston. So I don't think that really lines up. The other thing is just want to reiterate, for the MBTA to look at some of its own data, including its own white papers. The ferry has, again, the highest fare recovery, some of the best revenue, less capital intensive than others, and it's extremely reliable. So I think it really needs to revisit some of that data in its own data. One of our elected officials, I think put it right in that, the elimination proposal can take on a life of its own. I think there's a lot of fear that it won't come back. So I urge the MBTA to strongly reconsider the elimination of the ferry. The real solution is always in the middle, and I believe there's a temporary middle ground here that can serve everybody. Thank you for the time.
Thank you for the comments. And I'm going to unmute last name Reagan.
Hi, good evening. My name is Grace Regan, and I serve as the president of BC High. So thank you, Madam Secretary, and partners in the electeds representing their constituencies. BC High is very concerned about the commuter rail, the ferry, and the MBTA service for our 1,402 students and over 200 members of our faculty and staff, as well as our alumni base, many of whom live on the South Shore. Our students ride from New Hampshire to the Cape, Bridgewater to Framingham, and Boston. We're also concerned about the impact on UMass, JFK, EMK, Harbor Point, Mary Ellen McCormick, new developments with the Point Partners, and the Dorchester and South Boston neighbors. We had the opportunity to meet with GM Povtak with the Point Partners, which was really helpful. So please let us know how we can share our data sets. UMass will be back in full in FY22. Our families and alumni rely on the train, the ferry, and the commuter rail. The JFK station is critical to our constituents, and we just want to offer however we can help. So please let us know. Thanks for your time.
Thank you for your comments. And I'm going to unmute last name Foreman.
Thank you, Peter Foreman, South Shore Chamber of Commerce. We've submitted a formal letter of comment today, but just want to stress two issues related to the ferry that raise concern. The first is the significant real estate development, including housing, that is taking place around that. And the second is the concern that it is privately run with some private equipment. That raises two concerns about the framework you're using. The first is, to what extent are you considering other state interests, including housing and economic development, with your decisions? And the second is, how do you factor in the cost of returning services with private contractors and private equipment once you suspend them? And what does that equation look like?
All right. Thank you for the comment, which is a little bit more of a question for us and probably a little too complicated for us to answer right
Understood.
now. Yeah. I'm going to encourage anybody on on the call who has something to offer to last name Foreman. Maybe you can send him something on the chat of where he could find some of those answers.
Peter, I'll Lindsay, I'll reach out to
Secretary.
Peter. And we are looking at restart costs and mothballing costs and other things. We're still working on that, but it is definitely a factor. And I'll get back to Mr. Foreman, Lindsay.
Thank you very much. And at this point in time, we are at the time the meeting was supposed to end, where we will stay on the line, and I thank our interpreters for staying over with us to answer everybody who has their hands raised at this point, and ask anybody who doesn't have their hands raised to go to our other opportunities to share comment, either through the email address on the screen, publicengagement@mbta.com, or online at mbta.com/14ahead. And Meg H., I'm going to unmute you.
There we go. Can you hear me?
There we go. Yes,
okay.
We hear you.
Sorry. So my name's Jason. My fiance and Megan and I moved to Hull from Los Angeles last year. We've lived all over the place, and this has been the best move we've ever made. A big reason we moved to this town was the ferry. The first time on it, I really felt like a kid in awe. I never thought public transportation could be this convenient, reliable, and fun. It takes just 25 minutes to get into the city and over an hour by car, so you can see right away the benefit of the ferry. Nowhere else have I experienced such an easy and relaxed mode of transportation. We and so many others rely on the ferry to get to work while living in a beautiful and affordable coastal community. Nowhere else could we afford to do this. We uprooted our comfortable life amongst friends and family to move across the country, and it's possible in large part because of the ferry. This year has brought endless difficulties, but one of those difficulties cannot be to cut off an essential service that many communities count on. It not only allows our neighbors to get into work while keeping their sanity intact with an easy commute, but it also brings businesses to our town and others. The point of government is to serve the needs of the people. Not everyone needs the ferry, but a lot of people do. And just because more people don't need it than do does not mean it shouldn't exist. I want to make sure my new town thrives. So that's why I'm here today to participate and ask you to reconsider your proposal of eliminating the ferry. Thank you very much for your time.
Thank you very much for commenting. And I'm going to go to last name Prone. Prone, you should be able to unmute.
Got it. Hear me now?
Yes, we hear you now.
Okay. Thank you, Madam Secretary. Just, I'm primarily a railroad guy, but after listening to all the ferry riders, I really empathize with them because I've actually operated a lot of the Greenbush trains as a locomotive engineer, and I know friends that ride them. And by the time the peak hour trains leave Hingham Station, West Hingham Station, they're standing room only. So just imagine 5,000 or 6,000 people trying to get on peak hour trains when it's that crowded already. And a typical train set out of Greenbush has 800 seats. So I think it would be a huge disadvantage to the state and the riders to abolish that mode of transportation, because I don't think commuter rail has the capacity to carry all those people. But getting back to the trains briefly, we fought long and hard for weekend passes, and it came to fruition, and we fought long and hard for the later trains. And what guarantees do we have that these trains will come back easily? Because we fought years and years to get these trains on the railroad, and they were doing a good job, and now they're gone. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And I'm going to unmute last name Erdman.
Hello, thank you for your time. My name is Danielle Erdman, that's Erdmann. I'm a proud resident of Hingham and a zero-car household. I moved here because of the ferry. I also, before I jumped in, I wanted to thank everyone for how well this meeting is run. Really appreciate the moderator, translators, and how everything is laid out. I think you guys should come to my company and do it for them as well. Bravo. Second, I wanted to be a proponent for the ferry. My company has decided to protect the community by allowing employees to continue working from home until a vaccine is readily available. Once it is, they've confirmed we will be returning to our office in Fort Point. Ridership will go up then. In the meantime, Madam Secretary asked for proposals for the ferry. I haven't heard many, so I'll just throw this out there. I'd like to propose 2 inbound and outbound trips between 6:30 and 8:30 a.m., and then 2 inbound and outbound trips between 4:30 and 6:30 p.m. I recognize you have to look at staffing, assets, many other factors that I, as a layperson, have no concept of, so clearly take this comment as you will. I just wanted to throw out there the 2 trips, morning and evening, to get the ball rolling, and thank you all for your time.
Thank you. We appreciate you. I'm next gonna unmute last name Lopez.
Hi, how are you? Thank you for giving me this time and opportunity to represent the town of Randolph. And first of all, I want to say thank you for all the work that you guys have done and presentation, and a huge shout out to our town manager, Brian Howard. I would like to piggyback on what he has shared. Many Randolph community members and residents are essential workers, single parent household, and many families who live below the poverty line. It would be really essential if we keep in mind of transportation equity and how this will impact those families who are single parent households and are still trying to keep a roof over their families' heads. And that's just it.
Thank you so very much. Appreciate the comment. And I'm next going to unmute last name Johnson.
Hi, thanks for taking my call. I just wanted to talk about the train a little bit. I know President Reagan from BC High spoke about that. There are no school buses for the people going to BC High or going to UMass or going to any of the schools up there. And there are a couple of trains that are critical that they stop at JFK. You talked about cutting down some of the service on the Greenbush train. Could you talk about a little bit about what that is and what trains are being cut? The 074 is the one that gets the kids to school, and there are hundreds of kids that get off that train every morning. I see them when I'm on the train, and then coming back the 085 and the 089. So I know you talked about cutting some, but can you talk specifically about what your plans are? Because those are sort of critical trains for people going to school when there are no school buses.
So we don't have time to reply to everyone, but we haven't made specific decisions yet on which trains, and that kind of feedback, specific trains that arrive at a time that coincides with school, is exactly the kind of information that we really appreciate getting through this process, because we do have the flexibility, even where we can't provide as much service as people would like, to make sure that we provide the right service at the right times for specific users. So BC High was also kind enough to provide information on those specific trains, and we will definitely use that information when and if we have to adjust the Greenbush schedules.
Okay, thank you so much.
Thank you. Thank you for joining. And I'm next going to, pardon me, unmute last name Campbell.
Hi, can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you.
Hi, my name is Tracy Campbell. I'm an essential worker. I live in Hull, and I depend on the 714 shuttle to get me to the Hingham Depot. I travel 2 hours a day to get into South Boston and Charlestown. I oversee 170 seniors. And taking the ferry out, then taking the 714 shuttle out, there's no way to walk to the commuter rail, so we're pretty much stranded. For any of the essential workers or anybody that's taking the 714 shuttle out of Hull. seniors and everyone, especially me, that don't drive. So I've been very stressed out, and my seniors are very worried about what my status is going to be. I live out here to be close to my parents. They're in their 80s, and I don't want to have to move out of Hull, so I can keep my job. So it's essential to keep the 714. I know a lot of people in Hull take the 714 to the ferry too. So it's essential to please try to keep the 714 in place. It's crucial here. We don't have a lot of transportation options to get out. We can't get the Uber out here because we're too stranded. We have like one cab company, one driver on, so it's people can't afford to get a cab out every day to connect to the 220 bus in Hingham Depot. So just take in consideration to try not to eliminate the 714 shuttle. I appreciate it. Thank you.
Thank you very much for your comment. And I'm going to unmute last name O'Leary.
Hi, thank you, Lindsay, very much. Thanks, everybody, for this meeting. This is awesome. My name is Michelle O'Leary, and I'm a registered nurse at Mass General Hospital, and I take the boat Monday through Friday, and I have been for a few years now. And I ride the boat every morning. I take the 6 a.m. boat, and on an average for the past month or so, I've been counting about 25 riders at the boat, and most of them are essential workers, nurses, anesthesiologists, cardiologists, construction workers, and some military, and a few BC High boys that are riding that ferry. I know that the data is saying that there's an average of 7 riders, and I'm assuming that's an average of the whole day. But on the commuting hour boats, they are definitely over 20 persons on those boats. The 6 a.m., the 4 p.m. in the afternoon, 3:40, or the 4:30. I think it would be beneficial, rather than to completely eliminate the ferries, to just do commuting hours, maybe do a trial basis. We are essential workers. We have been working tirelessly through the pandemic. And when the T was suspended, the ferries, we were driving in, and it made for a very long day. We were all so happy to have the ferry back to help us have a good beginning to our day and a very relaxing end to our day. So I would really appreciate you reconsidering eliminating the ferry. Also, I just want to endorse that the ferry is the most dependable and most reliable source of MBTA transportation. I do have colleagues that ride the Red Line, the bus, or the Greenbush, and at least once or twice a week they are late for work, and I am never late for work. I can always rely on the ferry. Thank you very much for your time.
Thank you for your comment. And last name Jeffers. You should be allowed to speak.
Sorry, can you hear me now?
There we go. We hear you.
Yeah, it takes a while for the little thing to come up.
Apologies.
No worries. Sorry, my name's Robert Jeffers, and I'm a chief operating officer of a financial firm in Boston. And I wanted to bring a slightly different perspective. In reality, we have found the way to mostly work from home. However, we fully anticipate that next year, early next year, especially with the vaccine coming, that more and more people will want to go in. We do survey our employees regularly, and their number one concern about going in is public transportation. They're fearful that there won't be enough of it. They're fearful that they'll be too crowded. And I can tell you, to be honest, is if we don't feel that the public transportation's there, if these cuts go through, I'm not going to ask the people to go back into Boston. That's going to kind of be a self-fulfilling prophecy for ridership, because there isn't the ease to get in. People aren't going to come in because I'm going to still allow them to work from home. It means they're not going to be taking the subways as well. And it also means Boston's going to be slower, and we're not going to be going to the restaurants. We're not going to be going out after work because people are still at home. So I really implore that you look at the long term and the facts that things are changing and people do want to come in, but it is kind of a chicken and egg. If we can't get in, I'm not going to ask my people to come in. So just something for you guys to think about from a slightly different perspective. Thank you.
Thank you very much for your comment. and last name Lemnios.
You got it. Thank you very much. Can you hear me? My name is Phil Lemnios, and I'm the town manager in Hull. And first of all, I want to thank Secretary Pollock and all of you folks who are on this call. You're in a very, very difficult and unenviable position of having to make and present some very difficult and difficult options for the public. Just to get a couple of comments. First of all, I want to share the same comments that other residents and our representatives and chair of our board and members of the Board of Selectmen have made to, which is Hull, if we lose the ferry and lose the 714 bus, our residents have no way of connecting to public transportation other than by jumping in a car. And Hull has one of the highest proportions of elderly residents per density in the state. We also have lots of folks that rely on the bus, for instance, to get to jobs along the 3A corridor. The Hull economy is basically a seasonal economy, so that 714 bus is incredibly important, and leaving us stranded with no direct public transportation would be a real shock to our economy. And we do pay an assessment of about $250,000 per year, and under this scenario, our ability to access the services associated with that assessment would be very, very difficult for many of our hardest hit, our residents rely upon these services. I'd also like to ask you folks to kind of consider perhaps postponing your December decision date, because this plan was kind of formulated, I think, with the best of intentions, and there's many elements in the plan that are very, very thought out. But one thing that has broken in the last couple of days is the fact that we now have 3 major pharmaceutical companies that are in the final stages of FDA approval for, vaccine approval. And it looks like that May timeframe, between now and May, is a really important time frame of how quickly our economy and perhaps our return to certain habits are going to come into focus. And perhaps a 1-month delay to allow that to play out a little more, so that we can all have a better idea of exactly how these services can return. And the last point, very quickly, I thought Congressman Lynch, had a great idea, which is, maybe in this period when service is way down, especially on the ferry, reduce some of the ferry runs and in essence bank that reduction of ferry runs working with the ferry operator from that period of March to June. So I think that there would be lots of folks who are associated with the ride the ferry who would say, you know what, cut the ferry runs in half right now, and take that banked service in essence and put that into the April to June period. Work with the operator to at least extend that period where you have to make that decision on the ferry out into June or July. And that may be a mechanism to, again, allow a little more clarity to develop about exactly how commuting patterns are going to be restored as we get past the delivery of vaccine to lots of folks. So again, I want to thank you for the opportunity. And I know this is a very difficult decision. None of folks entered public service to cut public service. All of you entered public service to help the public. And I personally am through these kind of things on the local level in my 30-year career, so I empathize with you greatly. But I think there are some maybe alternatives and a few maybe off-ramps that we could take advantage of, given that we do have some big developments and there is hope. And that hope might allow us just a little time to make these tough decisions. So I would urge you to, first of all, put the final decision off until early January. It gets people past the holidays. It gets us a little more clarity on what's happening with the vaccine. Work with the ferry operator. Know that they are willing to work with you, and maybe bank some runs now into the June time frame so we get a little more service there and a little more clarity. And please save that 714 bus. There's lots of folks who have no other way to get to their jobs on that 3A corridor. Those are good hourly wage jobs, and they need to be able to get there. So again, thank you very much, and we appreciate all of your efforts. Thank you.
Thank you. I'm going to unmute last name LaRose, and I'm just a heads up to our interpreters. After this comment, I'm going to ask if we have any questions in the interpretation lines. to take before as we get close to wrapping this up. Last name LaRose. You should have a button that's saying you can unmute. Okay, I'm gonna go to our next comment, which is last, oh, hit the wrong button. Okay, we'll continue on. Last name Doyle.
Yeah, hi everyone, good evening, and thank you very, very much for your time. I'm going to echo many of the economic comments that have been made earlier this evening. Like so many of my friends and neighbors in Hull, I bought property here. I invest in the town through my taxes and utilities. I shop local, I dine local, and in large part, that's because of the ferry. You know, I don't think that I would have bought property in Hull if I didn't think that I had a reliable way to get to my work in the city. So the economic ripples spread far. Understand the tough position that you're in, but would echo what many have said. Please consider some middle ground. Thanks and good night.
Thank you very much. And can I ask our interpreters to come into the English room and let me know if there are any questions?
No, I don't have any questions. Just a bit tired.
No questions from Chinese speakers, no.
I understand my interpreters are tired. I have folks who have raised their hands since 8 o'clock. I do recognize the hour and we still have 200 people on the line. I'm gonna encourage you to go online to forgingahead.com. Do we have the list of the next meetings? If we can maybe put those up as well. You've seen the website. You can come to any public meeting. They happen to have a regional focus, but we talk about the ferries at all of them. So you're welcome to come. And our next meetings begin one more tomorrow night in the North Shore, and then more next week after the Thanksgiving holiday. At this point in time, I'm going to offer to, I think, Secretary Pollock or Deputy General Manager Mr. Gonneville, if one of you would like to make some closing comments for the folks who, we still have almost 200 people here with us this evening.
And I want to thank them for hanging in, and I want to thank everyone, first of all, for taking the time out of your evening in your busy life to participate, and to assure you that it does make a difference. We don't just sit here and, you know, go through the motions. People are listening. And I particularly want to thank all the people who acknowledged how difficult this is, and that we are not here. None of us got involved in transit or transportation in order to be able to make cuts. It does actually make a difference to the very hardworking people on this phone call. You've seen what a great job Lindsay has done, what a great job Laurel and Jeff and their teams do every day. It makes a difference to hear that people are aware that the difficulty the T faces with the fact that we can't provide more service than we have the money to buy, and it does help. And for all the comments, especially for the comments where people tried to give us ideas for finding a middle ground or taking a different approach, I do want to assure you we take those seriously. Nothing is locked in except the reality that we can't spend more money than we have. But this has been really helpful. All of the sessions I have been at have been really helpful. So I want to thank all the MBTA staff who put together this evening's meeting and all the other meetings, and all the public who participated. And stay tuned. We will get back to you after we complete the process. And I truly believe there will be some changes made before the board makes any final decisions. Thank you all for your input.
But Lindsay, I just want to say something real quick too for everyone as well. It is so hard to sit here over the last 2.5 hours quietly and not respond or want to engage in conversation about these issues. I think everyone has said this right along. We do not want to cut service. We do not really want to be reducing service. It is the situation that we are in right now. Also, I would encourage all of you, I know we've thrown out various links of where you can go to provide your own comments or provide comments. To keep it very simple, just go to our website. Go to our website, you'll see there's 3 main headings. One of the headings right at the home screen is Forging Ahead, which is what this process has been called. If you click on that, you'll get each of the service proposals, but more importantly, an area where you can provide your comments. So if we didn't get to your comments tonight, please go ahead and do that. And as the secretary said, we are reviewing all these comments. And again, I just want to echo what she has said as well. Thank you, everyone, for your participation tonight and your feedback. Thank you.
Thank you all again. And thank you to our interpreters who have stayed extra late for us. We appreciate you and have a good night.